Somebody stopped following me. I started producing stuff and they're like, yeah, I don't think so, I'm out. So welcome back. This is lesson 3, Economic Globalization, part 1. It's part 1 because we'll have a unit later in the year that really focuses on economic globalization again. So hence the 1 there. We're meant to be able to define global trade and give some examples of it and some barriers to it. So first step there is, who can describe what is global trade? Can anybody help us out? Yes?
The trade of goods and services globally that is beneficial to both countries.
So we're trying to exchange goods and services among many nations, people of different nations, and we do it hopefully in a way that benefits both trading partners. What is a related term that is used to describe an advantage that one country may have over another? For example, Canada's climate. Yes?
Comparative advantage.
Comparative advantage. So a comparative advantage is one of the reasons for global trade. If a country like Canada has a climate that is conducive to growing of wheat, and we have arable land that is conducive to the growing of wheat, then maybe we should grow wheat. We should do what we're good at. But maybe we don't have a climate for bananas, so we trade wheat for bananas. That's comparative advantage. That's the logic behind global trade. Another related term is economies of scale. Sometimes due to the advantages, including size, that some countries have, they're able to produce things at a lower cost. What's an example of a barrier to trade? Why might some countries decide, you know what, we don't want in, we want to opt out. We do not want to be part of this global trade. Yes? Yeah, so I really like the word that you use, preserve, right? They may want to preserve their culture, their politics, their economics, their religion. They don't want outsiders to mess it up. They don't want outsiders to create some kind of revolution of thinking. So maybe it's a country that is an authoritarian state, whether it's a dictatorship, a monarchy, a theocracy. They don't have democracy, and they don't want to be infected by democracy. And when you trade products, you also trade ideas. And some of these ideas may be quite revolutionary and could destroy the foundation of the society they're trying to protect. So a good example would be a country that opts out. North Korea, right? So North Korea is opting out because the North Korean leadership is a dictatorship. And if the people of North Korea, the North Korean people, were able to be exposed to the ideas from the world, they may see how dystopian their reality really is, how flawed their system is. There's another example of a barrier to trade. And that barrier is when one country wants to protect domestic industry. What do we call that? Yes?
Tariffs.
So tariffs. So you might have some tariffs. So often Canada and the United States, we get into trade disputes. Even though we have a free trade agreement, there's times when governments in Canada and the United States are pressured by local industries to protect them. So for example, Canada has a competitive advantage with softwood lumber. We have a lot of trees. We have a logging industry in BC that's very efficient, and we can sell softwood lumber at a lower cost than many US producers. So US producers will lobby their government and try to create a tariff, a tax on the importing of Canada's softwood lumber to discourage consumption of Canadian goods and protect American business. This is part of the populist Trump agenda of make America great again by buying American. We need to opt out so we can protect domestic industry. If you decide to buy products created in another country, you're supporting jobs in another country. So one of the reasons why cities like Detroit and Cleveland have rusted, they're part of a belt of America called the Rust Belt, is that hundreds of thousands of jobs have moved from the northern US manufacturing states to places like Mexico, and therefore it has created mass unemployment. So how do we make Detroit great again? We need to buy products made in Detroit, not made in Mexico. Another example of tariffs would be, let's say that the good people of England living in London want to purchase bread, baguettes from France, because, let's be honest, bread from France is better than English bread. But that would create unemployment for the English bread makers. So the English bread makers put pressure on the English government to put a tax at the border. Again, that's that tariff. So tariffs would be an example of a barrier to global trade. Or the North Korean example of people opting out to protect their ideology or their culture. There are some things working in favor of global trade, and there's something called containerization. And I would suggest to you that without containerization, we would not have a global village today. We would not have globalization as it is. Who can explain the process of containerization for us? What does that look like? Physically, what do they do? So what happens with containerization? Yes?
There's standard containers that can be made easily from one place to
Yeah, so instead of a truck going down to the docks and having to be unloaded by the shoremen, the trucks go down to the docks and a crane can pick the container off the tractor trailer, put it onto the cargo ship. Then when that cargo ship reaches its port, a crane can take it off the ship and put it onto another tractor trailer or put it onto a train. Majority of the world's trade, so more than 90% of the world's trade, involves containers today. So containerization truly is the lifeblood of the global economy. As we know, it was invented in the United States by truck driver Malcolm McLean, and he was frustrated. And his frustration led to innovation. Not only is this a story for Social 10, but I think it's a story for Social 30. So in Social 30, we're going to study economics again, like you did in grade 9 to some extent. In 30, we're going to be studying capitalism again. And we want to have case studies that show the successes of capitalism. So Malcolm McLean's story is the success of capitalism. That you had a private individual that was frustrated with something about the market, and he was inspired to be innovative. He solved that frustration independent of government, and because of his invisible hand, wanting to create some change so that he didn't have to sit there and lose profit while they're unloading his truck, the whole world has benefited due to containerization. Containerization is a success story of the invisible hand of Malcolm McLean. That he, guided by his own self-interest, created an invention that has benefited your life and my life as well. So containerization is pretty cool. Now, one other thing that we looked at today was the Humble t-shirt. And when we looked at the t-shirt, we can see some of the externality of economic global activity. So an externality is the unintended consequences of our activity, something that you don't really see. So when you buy a t-shirt, you might not be thinking of the cost of your t-shirt. You know, how much your t-shirt actually costs. Maybe it costs $9.99, and you think that's the cost of the t-shirt. But when we evaluate globalization, is it good, is it bad? One way to evaluate it is to see the consequences of our economic actions. And we can do that by looking at a specific product. How do we know the consequences of our actions? What's the consequences of buying a t-shirt? Who can talk us through some of the consequences? What's one consequence of buying a t-shirt? What's one consequence of buying a t-shirt? Yes?
I think it uses like 27 liters of water.
Yeah, so just the production of a t-shirt because we're talking about cotton t-shirts here, and most t-shirts are cotton t-shirts. The production of the cotton t-shirt needs water, an enormous amount of water. Anybody have the number down? How much water is involved? Yeah?
I thought it was 7,200 liters.
7,200 liters of water. Yes?
2,700. That's
Two-
probably more accurate.
2,700? Okay, so 2,700 liters of water creating a t-shirt. That's a lot of water, right? That's a whole lot of water. So remember when we were talking about the t-shirt and the irony behind the t-shirt, you might have a t-shirt that says save the planet, but the t-shirt itself may be doing the planet damage. So we have to look at the cost of the production of our products, and one way to look at the cost is the cost to the environment. What's the environmental cost of our actions? What's the ecological footprint of buying a t-shirt? And one of them is the consumption of water. And they told us that next to the oil industry, this is the biggest industry that is attacking the earth, that has a carbon footprint, right? Moving this product around has a carbon footprint second only to the oil industry. So the clothing industry is a threat to the sustainability of our planet. Anything else about the t-shirt that was alarming? Yes?
They use a lot of pesticides when they're growing it, which are pretty close.
Yeah, so they use a lot of pesticides in the growth of the cotton. And those pesticides are going to contaminate the ecosystem. They're going to be passed on to, whoever might be picking the cotton. Now, cotton is often picked now in terms of it's automated, but some of that pesticide is still going to leak into the water system and could contaminate people that live close by a cotton plantation. So there's pesticides. Anything else? Yes.
It uses slave labor
So
or
we,
something similar.
yeah, we used to have slaves in the south of the United States, and then they fought a civil war, and President Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, and we thought the whole idea of slavery was done. But there's more slaves today than at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. Not in the U.S., not officially in the U.S., or sometimes not even officially otherwise. They're not officially called slaves because of the negative history around that term, but there are people treated like slaves, exploited like slaves in the factories creating these t-shirts. So in places like Turkey and Indonesia and Vietnam and Bangladesh, where t-shirts are made, the workers in these factories are paid exploitive wages. So they're not officially slaves, they're not owned by the company, but the company controls their lives similar to slaves would have been controlled 200 years ago. Any other thoughts about the t-shirt, the life of a t-shirt? We also have to factor in the water used to clean it, the electricity used to dry it, and the fact that often we will wear a t-shirt a few times and then maybe dispose of it. So there are some hopeful suggestions at the end. What can you do as a citizen, a global citizen, that's aware of the ecological damage of the t-shirt? What can you do to be more earth-friendly? Yes?
Buy secondhand or donate your t-shirt?
Yeah, so you can go vintage clothing shopping. You can go to Valley Village and places like that. You can donate your clothes. Yes?
Buy Canadian-made t-shirts.
Buy Canadian-made t-shirts.
Reuse your clothes for different purposes.
Reuse your clothes for different purposes. So t-shirt becomes a cleaning cloth or becomes a mask. Man, I should make some masks out of my old t-shirts. Wouldn't that be cool? So enough about the t-shirt. Let's go to our last case study, bananas. So we looked again at the banana industry for two reasons. We want to look at the science side of the story, and we want to look at the labor side of the story. So from a scientific perspective, how is the banana industry dangerously alarming? Well, what's alarming about what we're up to? I'm gonna go close the door. So what's alarming about the banana industry? Yes?
They use a lot of pesticides and the bananas are genetically conditioned.
Yeah, so we can go back to that pesticide story again. We can go back to that pesticide story again. And yes, the banana plantation pickers are subject to dangerous pesticides, and many of them contain carcinogens. Much like there's carcinogens in the production of t-shirts, things like mercury, there's carcinogens in the pesticides. So there are high cancer rates with the banana plantation workers. Now, why do the banana plantation workers, why do they work there then? You know, if things are so bad, if they have to, urinate in the fields, if they have to go up and down the ladder 150 times a day, if pesticides get rained upon them while they're picking, why do they stay there?
Because they need the money to pay the bills.
They need the money to pay the bills. They don't have CERB, they don't have welfare. They live in countries with not as much social welfare. They don't have a country that has modern liberalism where the government gives them freedom through the government. So they may not have a lot of subsistence coming to them from government. They might not have other options because they lack an education. Or they're seen as old. The one lady on the video, she was 52. 52! And they're like, well, she was subject to ageism. We don't want to hire you because you're not as efficient as someone younger. So it's definitely a dangerous place. One other thing, they weren't allowed to do something. The workers weren't allowed to do something. And that kept them exploitable. What were they not allowed to do? Yes?
Join a union?
Yeah, so there's union busting. So if a number of workers wanted to create a union, the plantation might just fire them all. So they're not allowed to join unions either. It's a very dangerous industry. And as you mentioned as well, from a scientific perspective, they're creating sterile mutant bananas. And again, this is where people kind of sit back and kind of shake their head and say, we're living in the age of stupid. Age of stupid, right? Check your notebook right now, see if you wrote it down. Age of stupid. If you didn't write it down, you're just watching a guy in a mask talk. And you're like, what's he doing up there? He's creepy. Age of stupid, right? So we live in the age of stupid, meaning that our actions today are irrational. And there's going to be consequences to generations to come. Because we live in the age of stupid. We're making decisions that don't make sense. So an example of the age of stupid is to create bananas that have no seeds. We're creating the death of birth. We're creating a banana that we become dependent upon that won't reproduce. Because seeds are inconvenient. We don't want to pick seeds out of our banana. And when we monoculture all the Cavendish bananas are all from the same banana. It's very subject to fungicides. And being Irish, I don't have to tell you too much of a story about how being dependent upon one food staple is dangerous. Why are there so many Irish people in North America? Because we were starving in Ireland. Because we had one type of potato that we were dependent upon in the 19th century, and a plague came, a fungicide came, attacked those potatoes, and Irish, we love our potatoes. We were eating like 10 pounds a day at that point, and suddenly the potatoes weren't growing, and we were starving, and we moved to Canada. So, being dependent upon one monoculture of one substance is very dangerous, because there's already versions of that Panama virus out there that attacks the Cavendish banana. So it's a matter of time until this Cavendish banana no longer exists. Having said that, there's a job there for you. That in the field of science, in the field of genetics, there's a job there for you to either protect the Cavendish banana or to create other forms of bananas. That one of those growth industries in your future is genetics. And one of the things we need more than anything else is food. So hopefully some of our students at WCHS jump into that industry. Genetically modifying food, not to make it sterile mutants, but to make it more sustainable. So this is where I tell you a quick story. I had a roommate in college, Dave Bresler, who's a professor at the University of Alberta now. and he is creating genetically modified beer, because Dave likes beer. Dave, you like beer. He's not gonna follow me, so whatever. He's busy. He's a doctor. He kept going to school when I went and got a job, paid my bills. I'm bitter, Dave. So Dave has this genetically modified beer, and you know, what's it doing? It's helping leveling the sugar levels of people with diabetes. A lot of diabetics in Canada, and it can be very life-changing to be diabetic. So Dave decided, you know what? Canadians like beer. What if I could make a beer that regulates diabetes for them? So imagine being a student and you're like, well, I have diabetes, so technically I'm allowed to have a couple beer during class. that I guess there's a problem with his logic there, isn't there? This is when you're supposed to take over the class. All right, so I'm going to wrap that up and hit end on the old video there. But that's lesson 3. At the end of lesson 3, you should be able to say, you know what, I think I know what global trade is. I think I know why some people opt out of it. I also recognize why people might opt in, competitive advantage, right? Things could be cheaper or more varied. But I also see the externality of global trade. I see the hidden cost. The idea that there are things happening behind my t-shirt or banana that when I'm buying a t-shirt or banana, I don't really consider the attack on labor or the attack on science. And that complicates things. Ultimately, the point of this course is to evaluate globalization. Is it good or is it bad? Spoiler alert, it's both. And today we saw evidence of both. I'm going to go hit end, and then we'll move on to the next lesson.